The Woman in White. A ghost that never leaves. It was the kind of night where the fog hung heavy, cloaking the small town of Blackwood in an eerie silence. The townsfolk always warned about driving down Old Willow Road after dark, especially when the mist rolled in. But Sarah didn't believe in ghost stories. She was running late after a long shift at the diner, and taking Old Willow Road was the fastest way home. She tightened her grip on the steering wheel as the shadows of the overhanging trees stretched across the narrow path, their branches clawing at the sky like skeletal fingers. The legend of the Woman in White flickered in her mind. She had heard the story as a child. A bride, abandoned on her wedding day, had wandered into the forest in despair and never returned. They said her spirit lingered, hitchhiking by the roadside or standing in the middle of the road, waiting for someone to take her home. Sarah shook her head, laughing nervously. "Just a story," she whispered to herself. The first glimpse, the headlights cut through the fog, illuminating the empty road ahead. As she rounded a bend, her heart skipped a beat. A woman stood in the middle of the road. She was dressed in a tattered white gown, the hem stained with mud. Her long hair hung in damp strands over her face, and her pale arms dangled limply at her sides. Sarah slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching as the car came to a halt just feet from the figure. She sat frozen, her pulse racing, as the woman slowly lifted her head. Her face was pale, almost translucent, with dark, sunken eyes that seemed to pierce straight through Sarah. "Are you okay?" Sarah managed to call out, her voice trembling. The woman didn't answer. She raised a hand and pointed down the road. The passenger, against every instinct screaming at her to drive away, Sarah rolled down the window slightly. "Do you need a ride?" The woman didn't respond, but she moved toward the car, opening the passenger door and sliding in without a word. The air inside the car grew icy, and Sarah shivered. "Where are you headed?" she asked, glancing at her unexpected passenger. The woman's lips barely moved as she whispered, "Home." Sarah's grip tightened on the wheel as she drove in silence. The woman's presence was unsettling, her damp gown leaving faint stains on the seat. Sarah tried to shake the growing unease, but she couldn't ignore the feeling that she was being watched, even when she wasn't looking. The wrong turn. As they continued down the road, the fog thickened, and Sarah realized she didn't recognize her surroundings anymore. The road seemed to stretch endlessly, with no signs or intersections. "I think I missed the turn," Sarah said nervously, glancing at the woman. "Where exactly is home?" The woman slowly turned her head, her hollow eyes locking onto Sarah. "You're almost there." A chill ran down Sarah's spine. She hadn't noticed before, but the woman's hands were clenched tightly in her lap, the knuckles bone white. Suddenly, the car radio crackled to life, blasting static. Over the noise, faint whispers began to emerge, indistinct but growing louder. "Stop the car," the woman said abruptly. "What?" Sarah stammered. "Stop the car," the woman screamed, her voice a guttural howl that didn't sound human. The revelation. Sarah slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a halt. She turned to confront the woman, but the passenger seat was empty. Her heart pounded as she looked around frantically. The fog outside had grown so thick she could barely see beyond the windshield. Then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw her. The woman stood just outside the car, staring at Sarah through the window with those hollow eyes. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as the woman raised a hand and pointed toward the forest. "No," Sarah whispered, shaking her head. "I'm not going in there." But the car wouldn't start. The engine sputtered and died, leaving Sarah trapped in the suffocating silence. The forest beckons with no other choice. Sarah stepped out of the car, the cold air biting at her skin. The woman had vanished again, but the oppressive feeling of being watched lingered. "Hello?" Sarah called out, her voice barely above a whisper. A faint, mournful sobbing drifted through the trees. It sounded close, but no matter which direction Sarah turned, the source seemed just out of reach. The sobbing grew louder, more desperate, until it was all around her. Then, through the fog, she saw it, a crumbling, abandoned house deep in the woods. Its windows were dark, and the door hung slightly ajar. Drawn by some unseen force, Sarah approached the house. The sobbing stopped as she stepped inside, replaced by an eerie silence. The truth revealed the interior was cold and damp, the walls covered in peeling wallpaper and faded photographs. One photo caught Sarah's eye, a young bride standing in front of the house, her smile radiant. But the groom was missing from the frame. A sudden movement in the corner of the room made Sarah spin around. The woman in white stood there, her head tilted at an unnatural angle. "Why are you doing this?" Sarah cried, backing away. The woman stepped closer, her voice echoing through the empty house. "He left me, alone. I waited for him, but he never came back." As she spoke, her face twisted with rage, her hollow eyes filling with a deep, burning hatred. "You'll stay with me," she hissed, her voice low and menacing. "You'll stay? Forever?" The final fate. Sarah's screams echoed through the woods, but no one was there to hear them. The next morning, her car was found abandoned on Old Willow Road. The driver's seat was empty, but the passenger seat was soaked, as if someone had been sitting there in a drenched gown. Locals say that Sarah's face now appears in the fog on Old Willow Road, just like the woman in white before her. The ghost never leaves. It only finds a new victim to take its place.